What's up everyone, how's it going? This is Watch, and in this video I'm going to be comparing the top 4 probably most anticipated phones of 2015. Specifically, I'm going to be taking a look at the brand new Samsung Galaxy S6, the S6 Edge, the HTC One M9, and the LG G Flex 2, which just got released a couple of weeks ago. So if you're interested in perhaps upgrading to one of these smartphones in the near future, or just interested in seeing how they compare against each other in terms of specs, let's get right into this comparison. Now, physically speaking, you see that the Samsung phones and the HTC One M9 are fairly similar in terms of the overall footprint and physical dimensions, with the exception of the LG G Flex 2, which is certainly wider and taller than the other three phones. In terms of thickness, the M9 is actually the thickest at around 9.6 millimeters, and the thinnest is actually the standard version of the GS6, which is around 6.8 millimeters. And in terms of weight, the GS6 Edge is actually the lightest at 132 grams. The M9 is the heaviest at 157 grams. The G Flex 2 is not far behind at 152 grams. And in the middle, we have the standard versions of the GS6. Now, moving forward, let's talk about the displays that comes in these 4 smartphones. Now, certainly the Samsung GS6 and GS6 Edge are going to be pretty much identical in terms of overall screen resolution and quality. They're both using 5.1-inch display with a Quad HD resolution. And the M9 and G Flex 2 both are 1080p displays. They have a different PPI count because they are different screen sizes. 5.5-inch screen size on the G Flex 2 with a PPI count about 403, and the M9 has a PPI count about 441. A little bit better pixels density because it has that smaller overall display compared to the G Flex 2. The PPI count on the Samsung Galaxy S phones is around the 577 mark. In terms of screen technology, we have an LCD LED backlit display on the HTC One M9, which is a fantastic screen technology. Gives you great, vibrant overall colors with pretty good color accuracy. The LG and both Samsung phones are going to be using organic LED technology, so great black levels, pretty much pitch black in dimly lit conditions, which is quite fantastic. Great, vibrant colors. We're going to have to see how they compare in real life once we have all these phones on hand, but I'm guessing they're going to be pretty similar in terms of color rendition. One thing is for sure is that the new Samsung Galaxy S phones are going to be really good in terms of maximum brightness. Samsung is saying that they're going to get over 700 CDM square in terms of maximum brightness, which is definitely up there with some of your LED backlit phones. So for brightly lit sunlit conditions, looks like these OLED screens are going to be really good in pretty much any lighting condition. Now let's move on and talk about the internal specifications of these 4 smartphones. Now keep in mind the GS6 and GS6 Edge are pretty much identical in terms of internal specs. So they're both using the Exynos 7420 chip, which is an 8-core processor comprised of 2 quad cores, one clocked at about 1.5 gigahertz, the other one clocked about 2.1 gigahertz. So it's going to be really good in terms of multi-threaded applications and things like that. We also have 3 gigabytes of RAM on those phones. Now interestingly, both the HTC and LG phones are going to be using the Qualcomm Snapdragon 810 processor, which is very similar to the Exynos, basically an 8-core chip comprised of 2 other quad-core CPUs, similarly clocked, so expect to see very similar overall internal speed performances across all 4 of these phones. And in terms of RAM, we basically have 3 gigabytes of RAM on the LG if you get the 32 gigabyte version. If you get the 16 gigabyte version, it comes with 2 gigabytes of RAM, which is more than enough for most of you guys out there. And the HTC One M9 has 3 gigabytes of RAM across the 32 gigabyte model. Now, in terms of expandability options, we do have a micro SD expansion slot on both the HTC and the LG phone, which is quite fantastic. So you can upgrade whatever internal memory you have up to 128 gigabytes, which is fantastic. Unfortunately, the new Samsung Galaxy S6 phones do not have a micro SD expansion slot, so no upgradable memory option on those phones. Now, moving forward, in terms of the operating system, all 4 of these phones are going to be running the latest Android 5.0 Lollipop. They're going to have their skins. So on the HTC phones, we're going to have Sense 7. The Samsung phones are going to have the TouchWiz UI. Unfortunately, none of these phones are going to have options to run a native Android unless you root them yourselves and install a custom ROM. But in terms of the intrusiveness, I think the TouchWiz certainly changes the look of Android the most, and it's my least favorite of the skins. And HTC Sense 7 and the LG skins are not too bad. They carry much of the material design that you find in Lollipop 5.0. Now moving on in terms of the cameras, we'll start with the front-facing cameras on all four of these phones. Basically, we're using a wide-angle 5-megapixel sensor on the front-facing camera on the Samsung Galaxy S6 and S6 Edge, which is great. We're using a 4-megapixel ultra-pixel sensor on the HTC One M9, which is supposedly going to give you a little bit better low-light conditions. Again, we're going to have to see how it pairs up against these other phones. And the LG G Flex 2 is going to be using a 2.1-megapixel sensor on the front-facing side. Now looking at the rear-facing cameras, basically we have 16-megapixel stills with optical stabilization, which is going to be great for shooting in low-light conditions, as well as smoothing out your video footage, which is fantastic. The HTC One M9 is actually going to have a very high-resolution 20.7-megapixel sensor, so that's going to give you tons of detail. In terms of low-light, we're definitely going to have to see how it pairs up against the other phones. Early reviews say that the phone is not that great in terms of low-light conditions, but again, we're going to have to test it out. And the LG usually has a great camera, 13-megapixel stills capabilities with optical stabilization, so the same system we'll find on the Samsung Galaxy S6. The other cool thing about the LG is going to have something called laser autofocus, which is essentially going to give you very fast autofocus, and you'll definitely have a quicker response in terms of taking photos, especially if you're doing any kind of action photography, sports photography, shooting kids, anything that has a fast motion. So definitely going to be good in terms of that. Furthermore, regarding the video capturing capabilities of all four of these phones, they're going to be pretty much identical in terms of specs. All are going to have 4K at 30 frames per second, 1080p at 60 frames per second, and some kind of slow motion mode in 720p, which is great. Now, the last thing that we'll talk about is the battery properties of all four of these phones. Now, basically, the Samsung Galaxy S6 and the S6 Edge are a little bit different in terms of capacity, basically 50 milliamp hours difference. Pretty small overall battery size compared to the other two. Basically, the HTC One M9 has 2840 milliamp hours, and the LG G Flex 2 has the biggest battery at around 3000 milliamp hours. Now, keep in mind that unfortunately, all of these phones are non-user replaceable batteries, so unfortunately, you're going to have to send them to the manufacturer if you need a new battery, which is kind of unfortunate. But there still are some plus sides to these phones when it comes to battery life. They all have fast charging capabilities, so if you're using the high voltage charger that comes typically paired with these smartphones, you can easily get like 50% of your battery fully charged in like just a couple of minutes, which is fantastic. And in terms of the wireless charging capabilities, the Samsung Galaxy S6 and Edge both have certification for Qi wireless charging as well as PMA pads, so that's great if you use wireless charging technology, which a lot of people are doing. Unfortunately, the HTC and the LG don't have that wireless charging capabilities, which is unfortunate. But other than that, guys, that's really it. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to leave your comments down below on which phone you think has the most to offer for your personal needs. Love to hear all your thoughts and opinions, and we'll have all these major phones on our channel for a full-on review and comparison once we have them on hand, which should be anytime soon. And thank you so much for your support. Make sure to give us a thumbs up if you liked the video, and we'll see you later. Take care.